The woman rode into Newton, Kansas, on a stolen horse with blood on her dress and no intention of ever speaking her real name again. Dust swirled around the mare's hooves as she guided the animal down the main street, her spine straight despite 3 days without proper sleep. The sun beat down mercilessly on this August afternoon in 1878, and every person who stopped to stare saw a woman who looked like she had ridden through hell itself. Her dark hair hung in tangles down her back. Her green eyes were ringed with shadows, and the once fine fabric of her dress was torn at the hem and stained with what could only be blood. She did not meet anyone's gaze as she dismounted in front of the general store, tying the horse with trembling fingers that she quickly hid in her skirts. The store owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, looked up from his ledger as she entered. His eyes widened at her appearance, but years of frontier living had taught him not to ask too many questions of desperate people. She approached the counter with careful steps, as though each movement cost her dearly. "I need supplies," she said, her voice hoarse. "I can work for them. I can clean, or cook, or mend, whatever you need." Mr. Henderson scratched his chin, studying her. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and despite her disheveled state, there was something refined about her bearing. "You running from something, miss?" "I am running toward a new life," she replied, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was steel in that gaze, and something else, a deep, aching exhaustion that went beyond the physical. That is all anyone needs to know. Before Mr. Henderson could respond, the door opened behind her, and she instinctively stepped to the side, her hand going to her hip where a weapon might have been. But there was no weapon there, and the man who entered was no threat. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking blue-gray like storm clouds over the prairie, and they held a warmth that seemed at odds with the rough cowboy attire he wore. He removed his hat as he entered, nodding to Mr. Henderson. "Afternoon, Zane," the store owner said. "This young lady here is looking for work." The cowboy Zane turned his attention to her, and she felt the weight of his assessment. But unlike the curious stare she had endured riding into town, his gaze was not invasive. It was careful, respectful, and tinged with concern. "You look like you could use a meal before you worry about work," he said gently. "When's the last time you ate, darling?" The endearment caught her off guard. It was not said with any presumption or impropriety, but rather with the same gentle concern a brother might show a sister. She opened her mouth to protest, then felt her knees weaken slightly. She gripped the counter for support. 2 days, she admitted quietly. Maybe 3. Zane moved quickly, catching her elbow as she swayed. His touch was steadying, and she found herself leaning into it despite her instinct to trust no one. "Mr. Henderson put together some supplies and put them on my account. Darling, you are coming with me to get some proper food in you before you collapse." "I do not accept charity," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It is not charity. I am sure we can find work for you at the ranch." He said it with such certainty that she found herself nodding, too tired to argue further. 20 minutes later, she sat in the small restaurant attached to the hotel, watching as Zane ordered enough food for 3 people. When it arrived roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables, she had to force herself to eat slowly, though her body screamed for her to devour everything in sight. Zane sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee, giving her privacy by not watching her too closely. "The ranch I work at is about 5 miles outside of town," he said, after she had eaten enough to bring color back to her cheeks. "The Ashford place. Old man Ashford died last winter, and his daughter runs it now with the help of me and 4 other hands. It is hard work, but honest, and Miss Sarah could use help with the house and cooking. She has been trying to manage everything herself." She swallowed a piece of bread and took a sip of water. "Why are you helping me? You do not know anything about me." Zane met her eyes, and she saw genuine kindness there. "Because you look like you need help, and out here, we take care of each other. That is how we survive." He paused, then added, I am not asking for your story, darling. Everyone has a right to their past. You keep calling me that, she said. Darling. A slight smile tugged at his lips. Well, you have not told me your name, and I cannot very well call you Miss all the time. Seems too formal for these parts. She considered this, then gave a small nod. Darling will do, I suppose. Then darling it is. He stood, placing money on the table for the meal. Let me get you settled at the ranch. You can meet Miss Sarah and see if the arrangement suits you. They rode out together on his horse, her stolen mare trailing behind on a lead rope. She sat in front of him in the saddle, and though she was acutely aware of his presence at her back, she felt no threat from him. Instead, there was an odd sense of safety, as though some part of her recognized that this man would not harm her. The Ashford ranch spread out across the Kansas prairie like a promise. The main house was a solid 2-story structure, painted white with green shutters. There was a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed in the late afternoon sun. It was not the largest ranch she had ever seen, but it was well maintained and had an air of permanence that soothed something deep in her chest. A woman emerged from the house as they approached. She was perhaps 30 years old, with blonde hair pinned up practically and a no-nonsense expression on her face. She wore trousers, which surprised the newcomer, and held a rifle with easy familiarity. Zane, the woman called out. Who is this? Zane dismounted and helped the woman down with careful hands. This is Darling. She's looking for work, and I thought you could use help with the house. Sarah Ashford looked the newcomer up and down, taking in the blood-stained dress and exhausted features. Her expression softened slightly. Can you cook? Yes, madam. Sew? Yes, madam. Clean? Yes, madam. Sarah nodded decisively. The room off the kitchen is yours. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. I pay fair wages at the end of each week. You work hard, you will be treated well. You cause trouble, you will be asked to leave. We clear? Yes, madam. And stop calling me madam. Makes me feel ancient. Sarah will do. She turned to head back into the house, then paused. Darling, is it? Yes. Sarah studied her for a moment, and something passed between the two women, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition that both of them had learned to be strong in a world that often gave women little choice. Well, darling, welcome to the Ashford Ranch. Get yourself cleaned up and rested. You can start work tomorrow. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for belongings. There was a window that looked out over the prairie, and as the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she stood there and let herself breathe properly for the first time in weeks. She had escaped. She was safe. And no one here needed to know that the blood on her dress belonged to the man she had been forced to marry, the man who had raised his fists to her one time too many, the man she had defended herself against with a kitchen knife when he came at her in a drunken rage. Self-defense, perhaps, but the law would not see it that way. A woman who killed her husband, even a brutal one, was still a murderer in the eyes of society, so she would not tell them her given name. She would not speak of where she came from or what she had done. She would be Darling, and she would build a new life here on the Kansas prairie, far from the bloodstains of her past. The days fell into a rhythm that was both demanding and healing. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Sarah and the ranch hands Zane, and 4 others named Marcus, Tom, Billy, and Samuel. They were all good men, rough around the edges, but respectful, and they appreciated her cooking with an enthusiasm that was almost comical. After breakfast, she cleaned the house, mended clothes, tended the kitchen garden Sarah had planted, and prepared the midday and evening meals. The work was endless, but it was honest, and she fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. Zane was often around the house, more so than the other hands. He would come in with questions for Sarah about the horses or the cattle, but he always found a moment to check on her, asking if she needed anything from town, if she was settling in well, if the work was too much. She began to look forward to these brief interactions, though she could not have said why. He was 26 years old, she learned, and had been working ranches since he was 14. He had grown up in Texas, drifted north after the war. He had been too young to fight, but his father had not been, and had never come home. His mother had died of fever 2 years later, leaving Zane alone in the world. He had worked his way across the frontier, learning cattle and horses, before landing at the Ashford Ranch 3 years ago. "Miss Sarah's father taught me more than my own ever did," Zane said one evening as she prepared supper. He sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly waiting to carry a heavy pot for her, but really just keeping her company. "He was a good man. Fair. When he died, Miss Sarah could have sold the place, moved back east to family, but she chose to stay, to run it herself. She is stronger than most men I know." She stirred the stew, adding herbs from the garden. It must be difficult for her, being a woman in a man's world. "She makes it work, and she has good people around her." He paused. "Like you, darling." She glanced at him, caught by something in his tone. His eyes were warm in the lamplight, and there was an openness to his expression that made her chest tighten. She had learned not to trust kindness, especially from men, but Zane's seemed genuine. It confused her, this trust that was building despite her best efforts to remain distant. "I am just the cook and housekeeper," she said, turning back to the stew. "You are more than that." He stood, moving closer. "You have been here 3 weeks, and this place feels different, more like a home." Sarah notices too. She smiles more. Before she could respond, Sarah herself entered the kitchen, dusty from working in the corrals. "That smells amazing. Whatever you are making, I hope there is plenty of it." The moment passed, but she was aware of Zane's presence beside her in a way she had not been before. It was both thrilling and terrifying, this awareness. She could not afford attachments. She could not afford to let anyone get too close, or they might ask questions she could not answer. But Zane did not ask questions. He simply continued to call her darling, to offer quiet help when he saw she needed it, to tell stories that made her laugh despite herself. He spoke of cattle drives and wild horses, of storms on the prairie and coyotes singing under the moon. He had a poet's soul trapped in a cowboy's body, and she found herself drawn to him like a moth to flame. It was dangerous, this pull. She reminded herself of this every night as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She could not fall in love. She could not give her heart to anyone because she was not truly free. She was a woman with blood on her hands and a past that could catch up to her at any moment, but the heart, she was learning, did not always listen to reason. One morning in early September, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of hooves approaching. A group of men rode into the yard, and she instinctively moved toward the house, her heart pounding. But these were not lawmen or bounty hunters. They were cattle buyers from Wichita, come to negotiate with Sarah for part of the herd. She watched from the kitchen window as Sarah spoke with them, her posture confident and her voice carrying authority. Zane stood at Sarah's shoulder, a quiet presence of support. The negotiation took over an hour, but in the end, Sarah got her price, and the men rode off with plans to return in 2 weeks with payment and drovers to move the cattle. That night, Sarah broke out a bottle of whiskey she had been saving, and they all gathered in the main room of the house to celebrate. It was the first time she had seen the ranch hands truly relaxed, laughing and telling stories, and she found herself pulled into the warmth of their camaraderie. "Tell us something about yourself, darling," Tom said, his face flushed from the whiskey. He was a good-natured man in his 40s, with a thick beard and kind eyes. "You have been here over a month, and we know nothing about you." The room went quiet, and she felt everyone's attention shift to her. Her hands tightened on her cup of coffee. She had declined the whiskey, and she forced herself to breathe evenly. "There is not much to tell," she said carefully. "I came to Kansas looking for a new start, same as many people." "Where are you from?" Billy asked. He was the youngest of the hands, barely 20, with red hair and freckles. "Back east," she kept her answer vague. "It does not matter now." Zane, sitting across from her, caught her eye. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckles were white against the cup, and he smoothly redirected the conversation. "Speaking of back east, did I ever tell you boys about the time I tried to take a job in Philadelphia?" The attention shifted to him, and he launched into a self-deprecating story about being completely out of his element in a big city, unable to find his way around and offending a society lady by tracking manure onto her front steps. The hands roared with laughter, and the moment passed. Later, after everyone had drifted off to the bunkhouse or to bed, she found Zane checking on the horses in the barn. She had not intended to seek him out, but her feet carried her there anyway. "Thank you," she said quietly from the doorway. He turned, a bridle in his hands. In the lamplight, his features were softened, and she could see the exhaustion of a long day written in the lines around his eyes. "For what, darling?" "For earlier. For changing the subject." He hung the bridle on its hook and moved toward her. "They mean no harm. They are just curious." "I know, but I cannot—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "You do not have to explain anything to me," Zane said gently. "I told you that the first day. Everyone has a right to their past." "Do they? Even if that past is—" She stopped herself, horrified that she had almost revealed too much. The whiskey fumes in the house, the warmth of the evening. Zane's kind eyes, they had all loosened her tongue more than was safe. Zane reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the door frame. His palm was calloused and warm, and the touch sent a shiver through her. "Even then," he said firmly, "whatever you are running from, whatever happened before you came here, it does not define who you are now." She looked up at him, and the emotions swirling in her chest were too complicated to name. Fear, longing, hope, despair, they tangled together until she could not separate one from the other. "You do not know what you are saying." "Maybe not, but I know you, darling. I have watched you work yourself to exhaustion every day. I have seen you gentle with the horses, patient with Billy when he tracks mud through your clean kitchen, kind to Sarah when she is stressed about money. I have heard you laugh at Samuel's terrible jokes and seen you cry when you think no one is looking." He squeezed her hand gently. "I see you, the person you are now, and she is good." The tears she had been holding back for weeks spilled over, and she pulled her hand away to cover her face. "You should not say such things to me." "Why not, if they are true?" "Because I am not who you think I am, because I cannot be what you deserve. I am not asking you to be anything but yourself." His voice was soft, but there was an intensity to it that made her lower her hands and meet his gaze. "I am not asking for anything from you, darling. I just want you to know that you are seen, you are valued, and whatever ghosts are chasing you, you do not have to face them alone." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that she could have this safety, friendship, maybe even something more. But the memory of blood on her hands, of her husband's shocked expression as he fell, of her desperate flight into the night, it all came rushing back, and she shook her head. "I should go to bed," she whispered. "Good night, Zane." She turned and fled before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. The next few days were awkward, though Zane did his best to act as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed, at least for her. She was acutely aware of him now, of every glance and word and gesture. She found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, her heart lifting when he came into the kitchen for meals. It was foolish and dangerous, and she tried to harden herself against it. But love, she was discovering, did not ask permission. It simply grew, persistent as prairie grass, pushing up through even the hardest soil. Sarah noticed, of course. One afternoon when they were working in the kitchen together, Sarah had decided to learn some basic cooking. Declaring that she should not be completely helpless, the older woman gave her a knowing look. "Zane is a good man," Sarah said casually, peeling potatoes with unpracticed hands. She kept her attention on the bread dough she was kneading. "Yes, He is. Best man I have ever met, to be honest. Loyal, hardworking, honest to a fault. Sarah paused. He would make some woman a fine husband. The implication was clear, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sure he would. He has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. Her hands stilled in the dough. Sarah. I am not trying to make you uncomfortable, Sarah said quickly. I just want you to know that if something were to develop between you two, you would have my blessing. More than my blessing, my encouragement. She set down the potato and the knife, turning to face her fully. You deserve happiness, darling. Whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, you deserve to be happy. The kindness was almost too much to bear. She resumed kneading the dough, needing something to do with her hands. It is complicated. Love usually is. Sarah picked up another potato, but that does not make it any less worth pursuing. That night, a storm rolled across the prairie. She lay in bed listening to the thunder and watching lightning flash through her window, and she thought about what Sarah had said. Did she deserve happiness? Could she take it, knowing what she had done? Her husband had been a cruel man, violent and vindictive, but she had still taken a life. That stain did not wash away just because she had fled to Kansas and taken on a new name, but Zane's words echoed in her mind too. Whatever ghosts are chasing you, you do not have to face them alone. What if she told him the truth? What if she trusted him with her real name, her real story? Would he turn her into the law? Would he recoil from her in horror? Or would he understand that sometimes people did terrible things in order to survive? The questions tormented her through the night, and when dawn came, she was no closer to answers. The cattle buyers returned as promised, bringing drovers and cash. The sale was completed successfully, and Sarah paid all her hands a bonus from the profits. The mood on the ranch was celebratory, and Sarah decided to give everyone a day off and money to go into Newton for entertainment. She had never been to a frontier town on a Saturday night, and the energy of it was overwhelming. The streets were crowded with cowboys and farmers, families and working women. Music spilled from the saloons and laughter rang out in the warm evening air. Sarah guided her to the general store first, insisting that she buy herself something pretty with her wages. You have been wearing the same 2 dresses since you arrived, Sarah said firmly. You have earned this. Get something that makes you feel good. She chose a dress in deep green that brought out her eyes, with practical buttons up the front and a simple cut that would work for both everyday wear and more special occasions. She also bought new underthings, a warm shawl for the coming winter, and a pair of sturdy boots. It felt extravagant, but Sarah was right, she had earned it. When she emerged from the back room wearing the new dress, Sarah smiled broadly. Beautiful. Zane is going to fall out of his saddle when he sees you. Sarah, she protested, but she could not help the small smile that tugged at her lips. They met the men at the restaurant for supper, and when Zane looked up and saw her in the new dress, something in his expression made her breath catch. His eyes widened slightly, and a slow smile spread across his face. You look lovely, darling, see? He said, standing to pull out a chair for her. Thank you, she murmured, acutely aware of how close he was as he helped her settle into the seat. The meal was raucous and fun, with the hands telling stories and arguing good-naturedly about everything from horses to politics. She found herself relaxing, laughing at their antics, feeling more like part of a family than she had in years. After dinner, Sarah announced she was going to meet with some other ranch owners at one of the more respectable saloons to talk business. The hands scattered to their own entertainments, leaving her standing on the boardwalk with Zane. Would you like to take a walk? He asked, offering his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. That would be nice. They strolled down the street, moving away from the busiest section of town toward the quieter residential area. The night was cool and clear, with stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She was intensely aware of the solid warmth of his arm under her hand, the way he shortened his stride to match hers, the occasional glances he sent her way. You really do look beautiful tonight, he said after a while. Not that you do not always look beautiful, but there is something different. You seem happier. more at ease. I am, she admitted. I never expected to feel this way when I came here. I thought I would just be surviving, getting by, but this, the ranch, Sarah, all of you, it feels like home. I am glad. He covered her hand with his own, keeping it tucked in the crook of his elbow. You belong there, with us. They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. In the distance, she could see the lights of scattered farmhouses, and above them, the vast expanse of sky was coming alive with stars. It is beautiful here, she said softly. So much space, so much sky. Back where I came from, everything felt closed in, trapped. Zane was quiet for a moment, then said, Were you married, darling? The question should have alarmed her, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. She took a breath, deciding on a version of the truth. Yes, briefly, he was not a kind man. Did he hurt you? Yes. Zane's jaw tightened, and she could feel the tension that ran through him. Where is he now? Dead. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. She waited for Zane to pull away, to demand details, to look at her with suspicion or horror, but he did neither. Instead, he turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Did you kill him? He asked quietly. Her heart hammered, but she met his eyes. He came at me in a rage. He had been drinking. I had a knife in my hand from preparing supper, and when he lunged for me, She swallowed hard. I defended myself. But the law would not see it that way. A woman who kills her husband is a murderer, no matter the circumstances. So you ran. I ran. I took a horse that was not mine and rode for days until I found Newton. And I decided that the woman I was, the woman who made the mistake of marrying that man, who lived in fear for 2 years, who took a life even in self-defense, she would not exist anymore. I would be someone new. Zane's hands tightened on hers. What was your name? Your real name? This was it, the moment of complete trust or continued deception. She looked into his eyes, those storm cloud blue eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness, and made her choice. Grace, she whispered. Grace Nolan. But she does not exist anymore. She cannot, or they will find me and hang me. Grace, Zane said softly, testing the name. Then he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like shelter. Listen to me, Grace Nolan. You did nothing wrong. You survived. You protected yourself from a man who would have killed you eventually. That is not murder, that is strength. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and horses and prairie wind. You do not think I am a monster? I think you are the bravest woman I have ever met. He pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his gaze. And I think I am falling in love with you. The words hung between them, impossible and perfect. She should tell him it was too dangerous, that loving her would only bring trouble. She should pull away and reinforce the walls around her heart. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid. I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. I have been trying not to, but I cannot seem to help it. Zane's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. Then do not help it. Let yourself fall, darling Grace. I will catch you. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and it felt like coming home. His lips were warm, his touch reverent, and she melted into him, letting herself feel everything she had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I will keep your secret, he murmured, and I will keep you safe. I promise you that, Grace. How can you promise such a thing? If the law comes, then we will deal with it together. But Kansas is a long way from wherever you came from, and Newton is full of people starting over. No one here is going to ask questions or go digging into your past. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. You are darling to everyone here, and that is all they need to know. But to me, you are Grace, and I love every part of you, past, present, and future. She wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Zane, marry me. The words shocked her into silence. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me, he repeated, his eyes intense. I know it is fast, and I know you have reason to be wary of marriage after what you went through, but I love you, Grace. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to protect you and cherish you and show you what marriage should be, a partnership between equals, built on love and respect. Tears streamed down her face, and she could not tell if they were from joy or fear or some combination of both. I am not free to marry. I do not have papers. And even if I did, they would be in my real name. It could raise questions. Then we will get married quietly, just us and a preacher. We will use your new name. Darling Ashford, maybe, if you want to take my name. Or we can say you are a widow with no papers because they were lost. There are ways. Grace, if you want this, if you want me, we will find a way. She looked at this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, who had shown her kindness when she was at her lowest, who had somehow seen through all her defenses to the frightened woman underneath and loved her anyway. She thought about the life he was offering: safety, love, a future. It was everything she had thought she could never have. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will marry you. His whoop of joy startled her, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. We should tell Sarah, she said when they finally came up for air. We should, Zane agreed, though I suspect she already knows. She has been trying to push us together for weeks. They walked back into town hand in hand, and Grace felt lighter than she had in years. She had told him the truth, or enough of it, and he had not turned away. He had offered her love instead of judgment, a future instead of condemnation. It felt like a miracle. Sarah was indeed unsurprised when they told her the news, though she was thrilled. Finally, she said, hugging them both. I was wondering how long you two would take to figure out what everyone else could see plain as day. She ordered champagne, real French champagne that cost more than a week's wages, and toasted to their happiness. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the Newton Church. The preacher, an elderly man who had seen every kind of frontier story, asked no difficult questions when they explained that Grace's papers had been lost in a fire and she was going by a nickname. He married them as Zane Ashford and Darling Nolan, and if he thought it was odd, he kept his thoughts to himself. Sarah stood as witness, along with the ranch hands, and Grace wore her green dress with wild flowers in her hair. Zane could not stop smiling throughout the entire ceremony, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with such tender passion that Sarah had to clear her throat to remind them they had an audience. That night, in Zane's small room in the bunkhouse that they would share until they could build their own cabin, Grace discovered what marriage could be when it was built on love. Zane was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what brought her pleasure, whispering words of love and devotion against her skin. She had only known her first husband's rough, selfish taking, and this reverent giving was a revelation. Afterward, wrapped in Zane's arms, with her head on his chest, she felt tears slide down her cheeks. Did I hurt you? Zane asked immediately, starting to pull away. No. She held him tighter. No, you were perfect. I am crying because I am happy, because I did not know it could be like this. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. It will always be like this between us, Grace. I promise you that. I will spend every day of our lives making you happy. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much, Zane Ashford. And I love you, Grace Ashford. The name settled over her like a benediction. Grace Ashford. Not Grace Nolan with all that name's blood and terror. Not Darling, the nameless woman with no past, but Grace Ashford, wife to Zane, with a real name and a real life and a real future. The autumn passed in a haze of happiness. They began building their cabin on a piece of land at the edge of the Ashford property that Sarah gifted them as a wedding present. Zane and the other hands worked on it in their spare time, and Grace helped where she could, learning to mix mortar and steady beams. It was hard work, but satisfying, watching their home take shape board by board. She continued to cook for the ranch, though she now did it from a place of joy rather than necessity. Sarah had become like a sister to her, and the ranch hands were like brothers. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged to a family. Winter came early that year, sweeping across the prairie with bitter winds and snow. The cabin was finished just before the first major storm, and she and Zane moved in with a sense of accomplishment. It was small, just 2 rooms with space to add more later, but it was theirs. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire with snow howling outside, Zane pulled her close and said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" she asked, content in the circle of his arms. "About next spring. I have been saving money for years, and with the bonus from the cattle sale, I have enough to buy a small herd of our own. Sarah said we could run them on her land in exchange for me continuing to work for her. It would be the start of our own ranch." Grace turned to look at him, seeing the hope and ambition in his eyes. "You want to be your own boss. I want to build something for us, for our family." He placed a hand on her stomach, though there was no sign of a child yet. "For our future." She covered his hand with hers. "Then we will do it. Together." "Together," he agreed, kissing her softly. As winter deepened, Grace found herself settling into a contentment she had never imagined possible. The nightmares about her first husband came less frequently now, and when they did, Zane was there to hold her until she felt safe again. He never pushed her to talk about those dark times unless she wanted to, and she loved him all the more for his patience. Christmas was celebrated simply, with gifts made by hand and a feast prepared together. Sarah joined them in their little cabin, bringing a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine. They sang carols and told stories, and Grace felt her heart swell with gratitude for this strange, wonderful family she had found. In January, on a day when the snow was falling softly and the world seemed hushed and peaceful, Grace realized her monthly time was late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but after another week passed, she could no longer deny the possibility. She told Zane one night in bed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and joy, "I think I might be carrying a child." Zane went very still, then sat up, pulling her with him so he could see her face in the lamplight. "Truly? I think so. It is early yet, but the signs are there." His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and then he was kissing her face all over, laughing with pure joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." His happiness was infectious, and she found herself laughing too, even as tears ran down her face. "You are pleased? Pleased? Grace, I am over the moon. You have given me everything: your love, your trust, your hand in marriage, and now a child?" He placed his hand reverently on her still, flat stomach. "I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was confirmed a few weeks later by a doctor in Newton, and the whole ranch celebrated the news. Sarah knitted baby clothes with determined concentration, though she had to have Grace redo half of them when they turned out lopsided. The hands became even more protective, insisting Grace not lift anything heavy or work too hard. Zane was the most devoted husband she could have imagined, making sure she ate properly and rested enough, rubbing her feet when they swelled and holding her hair when morning sickness struck. He talked to her belly every night, telling their child stories about the ranch and the prairie, about horses and cattle and the beauty of Kansas. "I want our child to love this land the way I do see," he said one night, his hand warm on her rounded stomach. "I want them to grow up free and strong, with the sky above them and the earth beneath their feet." "They will," Grace assured him. "They will have everything we did not: safety, love, and parents who adore them." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new grass, and Zane made his purchase of cattle. It was a modest herd, just 20 head, but it was theirs. branded with a simple ZA that stood for Zane Ashford. He worked harder than ever, managing both his responsibilities to Sarah and the care of their own small herd, but he never complained. Grace could see the pride in his eyes every time he looked at those cattle, and she knew he was imagining the future he was building for their family. In May, when the prairie was green and alive with bird song, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but Zane never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and encouraged her through every contraction. Sarah was there too, acting as midwife with the help of a doctor from town, and her calm competence was a steadying presence. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Grace wept with relief and joy. Zane held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the tiny life they had created. "He is perfect," Zane whispered, "absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Zachary Ashford, after Zane's father, and with a nod to Zane's own name. Tommy, they called him, and he was the center of their world from the moment he drew breath. Grace had worried during the pregnancy that motherhood might bring back the darkness of her past, but instead she found that Tommy healed something in her. Every moment she spent with him, nursing him, bathing him, watching him sleep, felt like absolution. She had taken a life, yes, but she had also created one. She had survived, and because of that survival, this beautiful child existed. Zane was a devoted father, taking Tommy out to see the horses and cattle even when he was just weeks old, talking to him constantly about everything and nothing. The ranch hands doted on the baby, taking turns holding him and making ridiculous faces to earn his smiles. As Tommy grew, so did their herd. Zane had a gift for ranching, and their cattle thrived under his care. By the time Tommy was 2, they had increased their herd to over 50 head, and Zane was making plans to buy more land. "We should think about building a larger house," he said one evening as they watched Tommy toddle around the cabin, exploring everything with fearless determination. "Something with more rooms for more children if we are blessed with them." Grace smiled, one hand going to her stomach where another life was just beginning to make itself known. "That sounds like a good plan." Zane caught the gesture and his eyes widened. "Grace, are you—" "Yes," she said softly, "again." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, careful of Tommy, who was clinging to her skirts. "You make me so happy," he murmured against her hair. "Every single day. You make me so happy." Their second child, a daughter they named Clara Rose, was born on a crisp October morning in 1881. She had Grace's green eyes and Zane's dark hair, and she was a calm, contented baby who rarely fussed. Tommy was fascinated by his sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her, and Grace's heart swelled watching her children together. The larger house was built that year, a proper ranch house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a front porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. It was nothing fancy, but it was sturdy and well built, and Grace loved every inch of it. Sarah's ranch continued to prosper, and by extension so did theirs. The partnership between Sarah and Zane worked beautifully, with Sarah handling the business end and Zane managing the day-to-day operations. Their combined herds now numbered in the hundreds, and they had earned a reputation for quality cattle. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace found that as years passed and her children grew, the fear of discovery faded. She had been in Kansas for over 3 years now, and no one had come looking for a woman named Grace Nolan. Either her husband's death had not been investigated thoroughly, or the law had decided she was not worth pursuing across state lines. Either way, she began to feel truly safe for the first time. One evening in the summer of 1882, as they sat on the porch watching Tommy and Clara play in the yard, Zane took her hand. "I have something to tell you," he said, his tone serious enough that Grace felt a flutter of worry. "What is it?" "Last week when I was in town, I ran into the sheriff. He had received an inquiry from back east Missouri, I think asking if anyone matching your description had been seen in the area." Grace's blood ran cold. "What did he say?" He said he had not seen anyone like that, and that half the women in Kansas are dark-haired and green-eyed, so the description was too vague to be useful. Zane squeezed her hand. He told me about it because he knows we are protective of people starting over. He said as far as he is concerned, everyone in Newton has a right to their past, and unless someone commits a crime in his jurisdiction, he is not interested in digging into old business. So, I am safe? You are safe. The inquiry was months old by the time it reached him, and he said he doubts anyone will follow up. But even if they do, you are Grace Ashford now, wife and mother. Respected member of the community, no one here is going to betray you? She leaned her head on his shoulder, relief washing over her. I am so grateful I found you. I am so grateful you saw me that day and decided to help a desperate stranger. I am grateful you let me, Zane said, pressing a kiss to her temple. You have given me everything I ever wanted, a wife I love, children who fill my heart, a life worth living. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, while their children's laughter rang out across their land. Grace thought about the woman she had been when she rode into Newton frightened, alone, and convinced she would never be anything but a fugitive. She thought about the blood on her dress and the terror in her heart, the way she had refused to tell anyone her real name because names had power and hers could destroy her. But Zane had called her darling, and in doing so had given her a new identity. Not the damaged woman running from her past, but someone worthy of affection and care. And slowly, over weeks and months, she had transformed from that frightened stranger into someone new, someone strong and capable and loved, and then she had trusted him with her real name, her real story, and instead of rejection, she had found acceptance, love, a future. Years continued to pass in a blur of happy moments and hard work. A third child arrived in 1883, another boy they named Matthew James, who had Zane's blue-gray eyes and a mischievous streak that kept them all on their toes. The ranch continued to grow, and they eventually bought their own land adjacent to Sarah's property, expanding their operation. Tommy grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with the cattle alongside his father. Clara was artistic and gentle, with a gift for gentling horses that amazed everyone. Matthew was wild and free-spirited, always getting into trouble but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with him. Grace sometimes looked at her 3 children and marveled at the life she had built. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful. She had fled into the wilderness and found a home. She had refused to give her name to strangers and found a man who loved her enough to wait until she was ready. Sarah never married, though she had opportunities. She said she was content with her ranch and her extended family, Grace, Zane, and the children, who all called her Aunt Sarah. She was Tommy's favorite person after his parents, and he followed her around whenever she visited, absorbing her knowledge of ranching and business. In 1885, when Tommy was 6 and starting to ask questions about family history, Grace and Zane sat down with him and told him a carefully edited version of the truth. Your mother came from back east, Zane explained. She was married to a bad man who hurt her. She had to leave to be safe, and that is how she came to Kansas. Did the bad man follow her? Tommy asked, his young face serious. No, sweetheart, Grace said, pulling him close. He cannot hurt anyone anymore, and I found your father, who's a good man, and we built this life together. The important thing to remember is that sometimes people have to make hard choices to survive, and we should never judge them for that. Tommy nodded, processing this. I am glad you came here, Mama. I am glad you met Papa. So am I, darling, she said, using the name that had once been all she would answer to. So am I. As the children grew older, the story of how their mother had come to Newton became part of the family mythology, told in vague terms that left out the most damning details. They knew she had fled a bad situation, that she had been brave and strong, that she had started over with nothing and built a good life. It was enough. The ranch prospered beyond anyone's expectations. By 1888, They had over 300 head of cattle and had hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work. Zane had proven himself a shrewd businessman, and their beef commanded top prices in Wichita and Kansas City. They added on to the house again, giving each child their own room and adding a proper dining room where they could entertain. Grace had learned to play the piano, a luxury Zane had insisted on buying her, and the sound of music filled their home in the evenings. Sarah's health began to decline in 1890. She was only in her early 40s, but years of hard work had taken their toll, and a persistent cough that started that winter never fully went away. The doctor in Newton diagnosed consumption and said there was little to be done but keep her comfortable. Grace nursed her like a sister, moving Sarah into their home so she could provide constant care. Zane took over full management of both ranches, and the older hands stepped up to help. It was a difficult time watching this strong woman slowly fade, but Sarah faced it with the same no-nonsense courage she had shown in life. She died on a warm spring morning with Grace holding one hand and Tommy, now 11, holding the other. Her last words were, "Take care of each other," and they promised they would. Sarah had left her ranch to Grace and Zane in her will, with a portion set aside for Tommy to inherit when he came of age. It was an enormous responsibility, but also an enormous gift. Combined with their own holdings, they now controlled one of the largest ranching operations in the region. "She believed in us from the beginning," Grace said on the night after Sarah's funeral, as she and Zane sat on the porch watching the stars. "She gave me a chance when I had nothing. She brought us together. Everything we have, we owe to her." "Then we will honor her memory by continuing what she started," Zane said firmly. "We will make this ranch the best in Kansas. We will raise our children to be strong and fair the way she was, and we will never forget that she saw something in both of us worth believing in." They threw themselves into work as a way to process their grief. The children helped as they were able, learning the business from the ground up. Tommy, in particular, showed an aptitude for ranching that reminded everyone of his father. Clara discovered she had a head for numbers and began helping with the books. Matthew, now 7, was still more interested in playing than working, but even he had his tasks. In 1892, Grace realized she was pregnant again, much to her surprise. She was 36 years old now and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But life, as always, had other plans. "Are you worried?" Zane asked when she told him the news. "A little," she admitted. "I am older now. There are more risks." "We will get through it together," he assured her, "just like everything else." The pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones, with more exhaustion and discomfort, but in the end she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Sarah Grace, after the woman who had given them both so much. Little Sarah had her namesake's blonde hair and Grace's green eyes, and from her first breath she was loved fiercely by her entire family. Tommy, now 13, was protective of his baby sister in a way that made Grace's heart swell. He would hold her carefully, singing off key lullabies, and declared that anyone who tried to hurt her would answer to him. Clara, 10, was like a little mother, always wanting to help feed and change her. Matthew, 9, was less interested but still proud to be a big brother again. As baby Sarah grew, Grace found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The terrified woman who had ridden into Newton 14 years ago bore little resemblance to the person she was now. She had a husband who loved her deeply, 4 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, and a community that respected her. She was no longer running or hiding. She was living. The fear that had once consumed her, the terror of being discovered, arrested, hanged, had faded to a distant whisper. Enough time had passed that she doubted anyone was still looking for Grace Nolan. And even if they were, Grace Ashford was a different woman entirely, with a documented history in Kansas and dozens of people who would vouch for her character. One day in the autumn of 1893, a stranger came to the ranch. He was a lawyer from St. Louis, and Grace's heart stopped when Zane brought him to the house. But his business had nothing to do with her past. "I am trying to locate the heirs of a Mrs. Margaret Nolan," the lawyer explained. "She passed away 6 months ago and left a substantial estate." According to our records, she had one living relative, a granddaughter named Grace Nolan, who married a man named William Turner in Missouri in 1877. We have been unable to locate either Grace or William Turner. I am following every possible lead. Grace kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart was pounding. Her grandmother had been the only person in her family who had shown her any kindness, but they had lost touch after Grace's forced marriage. She had not known the old woman was still alive, let alone that she had been searching for her granddaughter. "I am sorry," Grace said carefully. "I do not know anyone by those names." The lawyer sighed. "It has been a difficult search. William Turner is deceased, died in a bar fight in 1878 according to local records, but there is no record of what happened to Grace. It is as if she vanished." "Perhaps she did," Zane said quietly, his hand finding Grace's under the table. "Perhaps she had good reason to." The lawyer looked between them, something knowing in his eyes. "Perhaps she did. Well, if you hear anything, here is my card. The estate will remain in trust for another 5 years, after which it will be distributed to more distant relatives." He stood to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, Mrs. Margaret Nolan left a letter with her will. She said if her granddaughter was ever found, she wanted her to know that she understood why Grace had to run, and that she did not blame her for what happened to William. She said Grace was defending herself, and that William had always been a cruel man who met the end he deserved. Tears sprang to Grace's eyes. She said that? She did. She spent years trying to find Grace to let her know she was safe, but she never could. The lawyer studied Grace's face. "You have kind eyes, Mrs. Ashford. I imagine if you did know this Grace Nolan, you would be a good friend to her." "I would try to be," Grace whispered. After the lawyer left, Grace broke down in Zane's arms. She knew. All these years, my grandmother knew I was innocent, and she tried to find me. "She wanted you to know you were forgiven," Zane said gently. "Not that you needed forgiveness, but she wanted you to know that she understood. Should I come forward? Claim the inheritance?" Zane was quiet for a long moment. "That is your choice, Grace. We do not need the money the ranch provides well for us, but if you want that closure, if you want to honor your grandmother's memory, then I support you." Grace thought about it for days, weighing the risks and benefits. In the end, she decided to let Grace Nolan remain in the past. The inheritance would go to distant cousins she had never met. But that was all right. She had everything she needed right here: a loving husband, beautiful children, a home and land that were hers. Money could not improve on that. But she did write a letter to the lawyer, unsigned, asking him to place flowers on Margaret Nolan's grave with a note that said, "Your granddaughter survived, and she is happy. Thank you for believing in her." She had Zane mail it from Wichita with no return address and hoped her grandmother's spirit would somehow know that her message had been received. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing leadership abilities that made his parents proud. At 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Mary who fit seamlessly into their family. Clara developed into a gifted artist, and her paintings of prairie landscapes began to sell in town. She was quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours alone with her paints and canvases, capturing the beauty of the world around her. Matthew, true to his wild nature, announced at 16 that he wanted to see the world before settling down to ranching. Zane, remembering his own wandering years, gave his blessing, and Matthew headed west to California with plans to work his way along the coast before returning home. Young Sarah, adored by everyone, grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about everything. She followed her father around like a shadow, and Zane doted on her shamelessly. In 1898, when Grace was 42 and Zane was 46, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together friends and family from across the county. Their children arranged everything as a surprise, and Grace was moved to tears by the love and effort that went into it. As she and Zane danced in their barn, decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, she thought about the vows they had made 2 decades ago, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. They had lived through all of it, and their love had only grown stronger. "What are you thinking about, darling?" Zane asked, using the nickname that still made her smile after all these years. "About how lucky I am," she said. "About how that terrified woman who rode into Newton never dreamed she could have all this." "That woman was brave enough to save herself," Zane said, pulling her closer. "Everything else just followed from that first act of courage." "You helped," she pointed out. "You saw me when I needed to be seen. You called me darling when I would not give you my name. You loved me before you knew my story." "I loved you because of who you are, not despite what you had been through." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I will love you until my last breath, Grace Ashford." "Grace Nolan Ashford," she corrected softly, finally able to claim all parts of her identity. "I think I can be both now, the woman I was and the woman I became." "Then I love all of you," Zane said simply. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by children and friends, celebrating a love that had been forged in desperation and tempered by time into something unbreakable. Tommy married Mary in 1899, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. A year later, they made Grace and Zane grandparents with the birth of a baby boy they named Zane Thomas. Holding her grandson for the first time, Grace was overwhelmed by the realization that this new life carried forward a legacy she had almost lost. If she had not survived, if she had not fled, this child would not exist. Clara, at 18, was courted by a banker from Wichita, but she turned him down, saying she was not ready for marriage. She wanted to focus on her art, to maybe even travel east to study at a proper school. Grace supported her daughter's ambitions, understanding the need to forge one's own path. Matthew returned from California full of stories about the ocean and the mountains, the cities and the wild places. He was 20 now, bronzed by the sun and matured by travel, ready to take his place on the ranch. But he brought back a restlessness that Grace recognized from her own younger years, and she suspected he would not stay in Kansas forever. Young Sarah, now 7, was showing signs of being a natural horsewoman. She could ride before she could properly read, and she had a gift for working with difficult animals. Zane said she reminded him of the woman he had found in the barn all those years ago, the one who would not tell her name. Life was good. The ranch was prosperous. The family was healthy and happy. And Grace, looking back on the path that had brought her here, could finally say without reservation that she was at peace. She no longer had nightmares about her first husband or about being arrested. She no longer jumped when strangers came to the ranch or tensed when the topic of her past came up. She had lived as Grace Ashford for so long now that Grace Nolan felt like a character in a story she had once read, rather than a person she had been. But she never forgot that woman. That frightened girl who had made the hardest choice of her life and survived. She honored her by living fully, by embracing joy, by being the kind of wife and mother and friend that she had once thought impossible. In 1902, on a spring morning much like the one when she had first ridden into Newton, Grace stood on the porch of her home and looked out over the land she and Zane had built together. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, covered in new grass and wildflowers. In the distance she could see their cattle grazing, her children working, the life they had created thriving under the wide Kansas sky. Zane came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. At 50, he had gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her he was as handsome as the day she had met him. "What are you thinking about, Mari?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked her countless times over the years. "About names," she said. "About how I would not tell anyone mine when I first came here. About how you called me darling until I was ready to trust you with the truth. And now? Now I have so many names. Grace, darling, wife, mother, grandmother. Each one represents a different part of who I am." She turned in his arms to face him. "But my favorite will always be the one you gave me that first day, darling, because that was the beginning of everything." Zane smiled, that warm, gentle smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "You will always be my darling no matter what else you're called." He kissed her then, sweet and familiar, a kiss that contained 24 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they broke apart, Grace looked into his storm cloud eyes and saw her entire world reflected back at her. She had ridden into Newton with blood on her dress and secrets in her heart, refusing to speak her name for fear of what it would bring. But a cowboy with kind eyes had called her darling instead, and in doing so, had given her the space to become someone new, someone strong, someone loved. And when she had finally been ready to trust him with her truth, with her real name and her dark past, he had loved her even more fiercely. He had married her, built a life with her, given her children and a home and a future she had never dreamed possible. The woman who had fled Missouri in terror would barely recognize the woman Grace had become, confident, secure, surrounded by love and respect, but they were the same person, separated only by time and healing and the love of a good man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. As the sun rose higher, painting the prairie in gold, Grace and Zane stood together on their porch, looking out at everything they had built. Their son Tommy rode past with his wife, their grandson secure in a cradle on Mary's back. Clara was in the barn, painting the morning light as it streamed through the rafters. Matthew was mending fence with the hands, whistling as he worked. Young Sarah was in the corral, working with a new colt, her laughter carrying on the breeze. This was the life Grace Nolan had fought for when she defended herself against a violent man. This was the future she had claimed when she rode into Kansas and refused to be defined by her past. This was the love she had found when she finally trusted a cowboy enough to tell him her given name. And it was more, so much more than she had ever dared to hope for. "Come on, darling," Zane said, taking her hand. "Let's go see if Tommy needs help with that new pasture he is fencing. And then maybe we can take the afternoon to ourselves. Ride out to that spot by the creek where we used to go when we were first married." "I would like that," Grace said, squeezing his hand. They walked down the porch steps together, hand in hand, into the beautiful, ordinary day of their extraordinary life. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, filled with the evidence of lives well lived, photographs on the walls, children's drawings, Clara's paintings, the piano where Grace still played in the evenings. This was home. This was family. This was the happily ever after that Grace Nolan had earned with courage and that Grace Ashford had built with love. And as she walked beside her husband toward whatever the day would bring, she thought about that desperate woman who had once refused to give her name to anyone, and she whispered a thank you to her. "Thank you for being brave enough to survive. Thank you for riding into Newton that hot August day. Thank you for accepting help from a stranger. Thank you for eventually trusting enough to speak your truth. Because without that woman's courage, this life would not exist." The prairie wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of grass and cattle, horses and home. Somewhere a meadow lark sang. The sky stretched out endless and blue, full of promise and possibility. Grace Ashford, once Grace Nolan, once simply darling, walked forward into her future with her hand in her husband's, her children around her, and her heart finally, completely, utterly at peace. She had told him her name, and instead of destroying her, it had set her free. And they lived happily, surrounded by love and family for many years to come, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own, expanding the ranch that bore their name, growing old together under the wide Kansas sky. Tommy took over management of the operation as Zane's health began to fail in his 60s, proving himself as capable as his father. Clara eventually married a kind professor from back east and split her time between Kansas and Boston, but she always came home for important occasions. Matthew settled down with a woman he met in California and brought her back to Kansas to start a horse breeding operation on ranch land. Young Sarah never married, preferring instead to pour her heart into the ranch and the horses she loved, taking over the breeding program with Matthew and making a name for herself across the state. Grace and Zane became great-grandparents multiple times over, their legacy spreading across the prairie in the form of strong, capable children who knew their grandmother's story, the sanitized version, at least, and understood that courage and love could triumph over even the darkest circumstances. When Zane passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Grace mourned deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given 46 years together, which was more than many people could hope for, and every one of those years had been filled with love. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built, with a simple headstone that read, "Zane Ashford, beloved husband and father, who saw the worth in every soul." Grace lived another 8 years after Zane's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her days sitting on the porch, watching the prairie she loved, telling stories of the old days to anyone who would listen. She spoke of Sarah Ashford, who had given her a chance. She spoke of Zane, who had called her darling before he knew her name. She spoke of the ranch and the hard work and the joy of building something lasting. She never spoke of her first husband or the blood on her dress or the desperate flight that had brought her to Kansas. Those secrets died with her when she passed quietly one autumn morning at the age of 82, holding the hand of her daughter Sarah, with Tommy on her other side and the rest of her family gathered close. They buried her next to Zane, and her headstone read simply, "Grace Ashford, beloved wife, mother-grandmother. She was brave enough to start again." But those who had known her best, her children, her grandchildren, the handful of very old folks who remembered the early days, they knew there was more to the story. They knew she had come from somewhere else, fleeing something dark, and had found the courage to build a new life. They knew she had refused to give her name at first, protective of her past, until she found a man worthy of her trust. And they knew that the love between Grace and Zane had been something special, the kind of love that sustained through decades and hardship, the kind that built empires and raised families and left legacies that would last for generations. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the blood or the fear or the secrets, but the love, the courage, the decision to trust, the willingness to give her name, and in doing so, to give her heart. The prairie wind blew over the two graves on the hill, carrying with it whispers of old stories and old love. And if you listen very carefully, you might just hear, in the rustling of the grass and the call of the birds, a cowboy's voice saying, "Darling," with infinite tenderness, and a woman's soft laughter in response. They had found each other when they both needed it most. They had built a life together from nothing, and they had loved each other until their very last breaths and beyond. It was in every sense a perfect ending to a story that had begun with blood and fear but transformed through courage and love into something beautiful. The Ashford Ranch still stands today, run by the descendants of Grace and Zane, a testament to what two people can build when they choose love over fear, trust over suspicion, and hope over despair. And somewhere, in the collective memory of that family, the story lives on of the woman who would not tell a soul her given name, and the cowboy who called her darling until she did.